Hi, everyone. Welcome to Inner Join. This is a show where we dive deep into the world of data governance and data management. I'm your host, Shinji Kim, the founder and CEO of SelectStar. SelectStar is a data discovery and governance platform with an automated data catalog, lineage, and documentation. Today, I'm really excited to have Archit Shah, staff software engineer from VTS, to discuss distributed data management, decentralized data management at VTS. So please comment on the chat if you have any questions for us during the show. And Archit, welcome to InnerJoin.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Awesome. So I know that you prepared some presentations for us. So let's go over that first. I'm really excited to learn more about your journey at VTS, getting decentralized data management, or for some people to call it data mesh. So I'll let you take it away.
Thank you. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this presentation on decentralized data management. It's a increasingly popular topic. And yeah, I'll just take you through our journey at VTS around this. Before we dive in, here's the agenda for today. I'll introduce myself, give some context. We'll see what VTS as an organization does. What's our data platform? What does it look like? What is our vision and the mission for our data platform, and how we are operationalizing that vision. Towards the end, we will put a spotlight on the tooling, which is SelectStar, and how it enables us to operationalize this vision. And then we will look at what's next. What are the headwinds? What are the tailwinds? And how do we plan to take it further? My name is Archit Shah, as you know. I'm a staff software engineer for data at VTS. I've been here for just about 1 year. So most of the things that you will see here was, started out by implemented by great engineers before my time. And I have been in the data engineering and the BI space for about 10 years now. I started out working on, legacy on-prem tools like SSIS, SSAS, and then transitioned towards cloud and the more open source stack. My recent focus in the last 3 to 4 years has been on how do I decentralize data functions in the organizations, and how do we empower the application and the domain teams? A bit of overview on VTS. VTS stands for View the Space. It's a prop tech company, deals in commercial real estate. We help organizations with leasing, marketing, and then managing properties all in one platform. On the left hand side, you will see things like bookings, reservations, visitor management, deal management. One thing I want to highlight is the analytics part, because VTS, we monetize our data, and that's very important to know in the context of decentralized data management. We have a global scale. We manage about more than 13 billion plus square foot across different real estate properties. We are trusted by the industries. We have more than 1.2 million users. We have more than 45,000 professionals, and all of this from the leading real estate companies like CBRE, Blackstone, Brookfield, JLL, and more. So that's the scale of the organization. I will zoom into what the data platform team does. So it's part of the tech organization. We have about 10 plus application engineering teams or domain teams, and each team has about 4 to 8 members in here. Within the organization, we have 90 plus employees who regularly interact with our Snowflake data warehouse directly, whether it is to explore data, debug something. We have 90 plus employees doing that. And then we have 180 plus employees who regularly interact with our Looker dashboards. In the next slide, we will look at the tech stack, but this is just how the organization looks like from the tech perspective. The status quo for a long time was we have end-to-end parallel data processes and stacks, which were also a result of past acquisitions. We have a massive data asset sprawl, which is like more than 2,000 Looker dashboards, more than 3,000 Looker facing Snowflake tables, like the transformed data sets, and then about 1.2 thousand DBT models. So that's a very vast uh, data asset sprawl that we have. And then as part of the status quo, there was heavy reliance on just one central data team or analytics team, which created and maintained all of the data assets. So, what is the data stack that we are using at VTS? We have our sources, which is like Amazon Postgres databases, more than 12 plus them, some API sources, and event stream. They feed into our data warehouses using Airflow, Fivetran, Snowpipe. And then once things are in data warehouse, we transform it using dbt. And then towards the end, we distribute all of this using Looker and OpenSearch. Towards the bottom, which is I think the focus for today, we have the governance plane using Select Star, Spectacles, GitHub Actions. And then on the left, we also have monitoring plane, how we monitor our pipelines, get alerts on them using Datadog and PagerDuty. So now that we have the context of the setup of what the status quo is, this is what our vision and mission has been in the past couple of years. And that is essentially, we believe, domain and application engineering teams, they should own and manage their data assets. Now, when I say data assets, it's not just data that is sitting in the application database, but it's also the data that's being ingested, transformed, brought into the warehouse, and then surfaced into Looker or any other data distribution methods. We believe domain teams should own and manage that. And the role for the data platform team should be, how do we enable these teams? How do we govern what these teams are doing better? And then how do we support these teams at a scale? So that's our vision and mission. Why are we doing this? What are the challenges from the status quo that makes us think that this is the right path ahead? So in the past, we have seen if you have a centralized team, you have single point of failure. Someone leaves the organization, they leave with a lot of domain knowledge, and no one understands what they left behind. Slow turnaround time. If 10 plus teams are waiting on one single team, then you're eventually going to have slow turnaround times, even for minor changes. Scalability bottleneck, again related. If you want to onboard more insights, more dashboards, you cannot scale unless you hire new people in this centralized team. And then one of the inherent challenges is limited domain context. This one team will not have the domain expertise that 10 plus engineering teams have within their respective domains. And all of the above ends up creating a dependency culture where application teams rely too heavily on one central team, and that often stifles ownership when you see bugs and issues. And it also stifles time spent in innovation on the data platform. So those are the challenges for the status quo. And in the context of VTS, since we monetize our data, all of this translates to customer value and dollar amount. So what we are trying to do, what we are trying to achieve is, how do we empower domain teams with this vision? And one of the reasons is why we are doing this is we believe that application engineering teams have the best in class domain expertise. They have the most context behind their own data, and that's why they are best placed to support and maintain their data assets. By doing that, we also encourage proactive data stewardship. So if they are making any upstream changes, inherently now they are also thinking about how is this going to impact the downstream reporting, which is also managed by the same teams. And one of the surprises that we have seen is cross pollination of best practices, because we have to understand these application engineering teams. They are essentially software engineers. They are already accustomed to CI/CD testing, deployment, best in class DevX experiences. And when you onboard them on data platform, they bring all of those best practices on the data platform as well, leading to a cross pollination, which we did not aim for, but it was a very good surprise to see. And the outcome from that is we want to drive faster insights. We want to make sure BTS is able to deliver reporting and metrics without dependency on one central. I've put asterisks on the faster insight because initially it's going to be very painful for application teams to be onboarded on the stack to learn the ropes. And that is not going to lead to faster insights. In fact, it will lead to slower insights. But the goal is eventually, as they get accustomed to these things, it will lead to driving faster insights for the organization. And what's the vision for the data platform team in this new world once we have empowered the teams, right? We essentially become the enabler, then being the executor of the stack. So this means we move away from building one-off data pipelines and dashboards, and instead we focus on asking bigger questions. Hey, how do we enable self-serve capabilities on the platform? How do we build scalable frameworks on the platform that can be reused? And the focus then turns into, okay, if other teams are going to contribute to the platform, then governance has to become a first class concern because we don't want to create silos in the organization. We want to make sure all the teams are still following the same best practices, same data quality checks, everything else that we would expect from the data platform. And this also helps us think more about innovation than just what we are going to execute in the next quarter, right? So this then allows us to invest into forward-looking efforts like how do we better manage our metadata, observability, semantic layers, AI readiness, all of these things. So we have seen what we are aiming for. We have seen the vision. Uh, I'll now take us through how we approached operationalizing this vision at VTS over the past couple of years. So the way I see it, there are two buckets to it. The first bucket of work effort that is required is how do we lower technical barriers for other teams to be able to build on the data stack. And the guiding principle here that we always follow is do not expect application engineers to have the data engineering expertise. We have to approach this from a perspective of how do we empower application engineers without putting roadblocks on their workflows. And the way to do that is by doing essentially two things. We work on building frameworks that empower other engineers. So one of the things we do as part of this is we build pipeline scaffolds that are templatable. So we follow the try principle, do it only once, do not repeat yourself. And we create a pipeline in such a manner that you can bring in your own schedule, your own custom configuration, and your own alert channels on top of these pipelines. We'll talk more about what they look like in the next slide, but essentially they are templated. And then we also focus on things like DBT macros, where we write a bunch of SQL code that is reusable across different use cases, especially for how do we manage these things in Snowflake and data exports and some of the other things where macros can be really powerful. The other line of work is we can reduce technical barriers by also building guardrails that can guide engineers on how they should be doing things. So this means leveraging CI/CD for things like linting, testing, documentation. We also use some other creative ways to enforce guardrails, which is like using Project Evaluator on DBT to enforce data warehouse best practices. I will take us through what that is in a further slide. And then we also focus on data modeling a lot, the designing of the data model. I think this is one crucial thing that still has to be driven by a central team. It cannot be decentralized because data modeling at the end of the day is more art than science. You have to have experience to figure out what the data model should look like. So we still try to play that advisory role and make sure we have this active engagement when it comes to designing the data models. And then we are also using this nice feature from Select Star. They have a GitHub action where if you are making any change on your DBT GitHub repo, it automatically gives you a lineage impact analysis saying that, hey, if you are going to change model A, it is also going to impact model B. So have you taken that into account? Yeah, we'll dive deeper into the templated jobs. I'll just take us through what those look like. It's very simple. Essentially, we figured out we have a set of common patterns in the organization, like moving data from Postgres to Snowflake, Snowflake to OpenSearch. We created configurable jobs where users can just provide us YAML files for configuration on the left-hand side, and our job or our process creates one job per YAML file. And we have two sets of these, one for Airflow, one for Spark. The underlying logic remains the same. The application engineers bring in the configuration, and we try to make these pipelines as flexible as possible so that it can serve other teams. And one of the things that we can zoom into from guardrails perspective is DBT project evaluator, right? Because when you have a decentralized platform, things can go out of hand real fast. People will start doing their own things, their own conventions, and suddenly you have a data warehouse that does not make any sense. So we are using this open source DBT package called Project Evaluator. And what it essentially does is it can enforce naming conventions, documentation, tests. It can also tell you if the hygiene of the platform is going to be impacted by a PR, if it creates duplicate sources, if it is creating models that have not been used before, and if it is seeing there are dependencies on the raw data sets without them being transformed. It can also flag performance issues that can come out of the PR, like if your model is fanning out, if your source is fanning out, or if you have just way too many joins in your DBT model. And then we take all of these and wrap it up into our CI/CD pipeline to make sure that we are doing these checks on every single PR that comes to our DBT GitHub repo. And we also make sure that okay, we are carving out an exception rule set to make sure that teams are also able to bypass this if there is a legitimate use case where they need to have, let's say, model fan outs, then we allow. So yeah, that was an overview on the first bucket, which is how do we reduce technical barriers for other engineers to start implementing and contributing to the data platform. The other bucket is the culture. So I think at VTS, we did a great job over the past few years on the reducing the technical barrier. But what we were noticing is we still need to drive the adoption across different teams with the same guiding principle in mind, right? So there are a couple of things on how the culture plays a role here. So one of the things is top-down cultural shift, where basically we want to get top-down buy-in from the executives who can set clear expectations with other teams and make data ownership a non-negotiable part of the OKRs. The next thing is we want to create training programs. We need to make sure we are doing regular brown bags and engineering guild sessions to evangelize exactly how platform engineers can generate new insights and build new data pipelines with much less effort. The third part of this is documentation. All of the above only works if you have clear cut documentation that is geared towards application engineers and not data engineers, and clearly gives them a getting started of how they can contribute to DBT, Snowflake, and Looker. One of the things that we also worked on is creating intake forms. So this is more for product owners who are thinking of data related initiatives. So we kind of standardized how they can think about data related initiatives by creating an intake form, which forces them to think about how am I going to ingest this data source? Does it already exist? How am I going to model it? How am I going to implement it? So we kind of standardized a template for how do you gather requirements for data related initiatives. And then embedded collaboration with other teams to really drive this initiative. We work with other teams to co-build pipelines, and then we hand off ownership to those domains if they have never worked on this before. Sort of like playing a strike team where you collaborate with other teams for a couple of weeks and get them a head start so that they can work on it in future. And then sustained collaboration and sustained support. We host weekly office hours. We do ad hoc pairing sessions. We have a dedicated Slack channel where you can raise a question, and we always have a data support engineer on call who can work on those questions and work with you to address any questions that you might have on the platform. So those are some of the cultural changes that we had to adopt to kind of drive the initiatives. And now that we know those two buckets, I think it would be great to spotlight how SelectStar played a role in both of those buckets to kind of help VTS drive the decentralized data platform. One of the things that we did in past few months is we leveraged SelectStar collections. Collections are basically looping together a bunch of different types of assets like Snowflake tables, TBT models, Looker dashboards, all under one single collection, which shows you within a domain what are the data assets that basically we define ownership boundaries on the data assets using collections. So for this initiative, we did a 3 month OKR to kind of take the initiative of mapping DBT and Snowflake assets to domains and then mapping the domains to teams. The reason we do this two hop is we want to decouple asset ownership from the code location and we want to treat domains as a first class citizen, right? Because teams can change over time, but asset to domain mapping remains the same. As part of this, we went and audited about 90 plus DBT folders to kind of figure out, okay, these set of DBT models belong to this domain. And then we partnered with product owners, tech leads, and managers to have them validate that yes, these are the data assets that their team should own going forward. And then we automated the tagging of DBT models and figured out how we can sync that into Select Star because we don't want to make sure this is a one time activity. We want to make sure that this is something that keeps happening on a regular cadence. And every time there is a change at the source, we reflect that here as well. And as an end result, we ended up cataloging more than 1,200 assets across 19 clear domain groupings. So you can see that on the right hand side of what the collection looks like. One of the other things that SelectStar really helped us with is to enable self-serve. And as part of self-serve, it was able to manage or help us support a lot of common usage patterns. So some of the usage patterns that you normally see on data platforms is like left to right exploration, where you have application engineers who are trying to trace if I make this change on a source table on the left, how exactly is it going to impact in the downstream, whether it is DBT, Snowflake, Looker, what is it going to impact? And Select Star makes it very easy to analyze this. And if you flip that over, you get right to left debugging. This is usually support engineers who work with clients and they see a dashboard which is broken or a dashboard which is giving a number that doesn't make sense. And they need to work their way from the right hand side to figure out, okay, this Looker dashboard is pointing to which table? How are we populating that table? Where is it coming from? And then who owns this table? So full end-to-end column level lineage can be traced here. And then you can even pinpoint exactly which team made the change to cause the issue to kind of begin that engagement. The other pattern we see is deep explorations. This is usually product owners, tech leads, managers who are trying to figure out exactly how their domain is modeled. How are we joining data sets? What are the common usage pattern in my domain? What documentation do I have? So all of that is very well supported with SelectStar. The fourth pattern is specific to data platform team as we try to manage that we maintain a certain level of hygiene on the platform. So SelectStar helps us with identifying which are the popular models, how often they are being used, what's the query volume, do we have any similar models in our platform, and all of that helps us figure out uh, if there are any stale assets in the platform. We can cut the noise and then we can make sure we maintain a certain hygiene on the platform. The end result of all of that is you have tribal knowledge codified into SelectStar, right? Even if you don't have perfect documentation for some of the legacy data assets, you can actually use metadata driven lineage, query history, and usage patterns and try to understand and reconstruct what was the intent behind creating this particular data asset. So it really helps with building that tribal knowledge in the absence of perfect documentation. That's great. We worked on a lot of those things. We identified these things. But one of the key aspects is how do we roll it out and how do we train other teams to fully evangelize and fully communicate that we have this capability on the platform. So one of the things we did is we made sure we have a committed OKR. We committed to this work. We also engaged with other teams and made sure they are aware that this work is coming their way, where they need to look at the data assets. Um, We focused on live enablement. We held live demo sessions at our engineering guilds and brown bags to showcase what these domain collections look like, how you can trace the lineage, and what does real world use case look like. And kept it engaging so that they can ask questions and they can actually see how we would use this tool out in the wild. And then structured guidance. We made sure we are writing documentation that is geared towards application engineers, that does not overwhelm them, and that it captures the common usage patterns that we just discussed. The fourth part is hands-on support. We want to make sure we don't just pass on and throw this over the fence. We need to give continuous support to other teams as they try to onboard and work with this in their day to day. Some of the things we do, we embed with other teams in their live debugging sessions if they've never done this before. So we kind of walk them through how you would trace an issue or how you would explore something using Select Star. And we get two things done at the same time. One, we help them solve the issue at hand, and two, we are also training them so that the next time they have to do this, they feel well supported and they have the capability to drive it. So that's our rollout and training that we made sure we did to kind of get to the finish line on this one. And as an end result, when you set up OKRs, you also set up metrics for yourself as to how you are tracking the success for your objectives. So one of the things we noticed was the user base on SelectStar doubled. So SelectStar gives you like number of users on a given month, and you can actually go back in time and see. So we noticed in July 2024, we had about 30 users who were on SelectStar. In April to 2025, we now have more than 60 users on SelectStar, which says that there has been strong cross team adoption, and nearly 50% of the tech team members are now on the Select Star. The other metric that we were looking at is active users metric in the last 90 days. This is also something that comes out of the box with Select Star. So we were able to see in the same period above, the active usage went from 22 users to 43 users, almost doubling that active usage on the platform. Uh, we also try to figure out who is using the platform and try to segment them. So we noticed that it's not just the data platform team or the data services team that are using this, which is accounts for about 15 users, but the majority of the users, like 45 plus users, are from other squads and other parts of the organization. And it's not just application engineers who are using this. We also noticed product owners are using this a lot. We have customer support, client support teams using it. We have QA teams using it. And we even have senior leaders like VPs and directors who are using the platform. And now this has become the default. So SelectStar is now the go-to tool that we use for tracing our lineage, understanding the impact analysis, and just getting started on how we explore our data across different roles, whether you're from data team, application team, or any other part of the organization. So overall, it was a success for us to kind of drive the goal of adoption on SelectStar. All right. Now we have seen what we have done so far. We'll now talk about what's next for the decentralized data platform and SelectStar at VTS. And what are some of the reflections, learnings that we have seen, noticed? Next, particularly on SelectStar for us, is we want to enrich our asset context, meaning we want to have more documentation and metadata attached to our data assets. And we want teams to be able to do that because they have the knowledge of what this data point exactly means. And what SelectStar enabled us to do is like segment the data assets and figure out for each individual team what is the percentage of the documentation that they have and kind of identify places where we need to drastically up our game for documentation. And this is crucial for the company as we work on our AI readiness from the data platform to enable things like conversational analytics. The other thing we are looking to do is automated tagging and collections. We have some level of automation today, but we want to further integrate tagging into different aspects of the data platform using CI/CD so that we can auto catalog all the new assets and domains as and when they're created. The other thing we want to do is expand the collection coverage. So right now we have only added DBT models and Snowflake tables to the collections, but eventually we want to get to a place where we have Looker assets, Fivetran, Airflow jobs, all of that embedded into collections. And then also things like PII tags and any other relevant metadata that we can find. We want to start attaching that to the select star data assets so that you can then start asking questions like, in which domain do I have the most amount of PII data where we need to focus on the compliance? And the last thing, which we have done in the past, but I think this is something that we have to keep doing continuously, is evangelize the stack, not just select star, but host regular brown bag sessions, demos, and continue lowering the barrier for application teams to onboard on the data platform. So some reflections on decentralized data platform, data mesh, whatever we call it. There are definitely clear wins, clear tailwinds for us, things that are working out, which is we have strong executive buy-in. We have an understanding that for us to reduce our time to insight, we need to make sure teams are taking ownership of the data that they have. And we have some early adopter champions across different squads who can now disseminate this knowledge within their squads as well. So that is a win for us. And then we also have increasing interest from non-data teams to understand the stack, understand the data modeling best practices, and kind of have the drive to improve the existing status quo that they are part of. But at the same time, we also have headwinds, things that are not working out that well for us. Education is hard to scale. You can do brown bags, you can do guilds, you can do live demos, but rubber hits the road when someone actually goes and does something by themselves. So that is a challenge to get everyone to do it and get everyone to educate on this. The other part is maintaining the hygiene on documentation. It is a continuous effort. It's not a one time thing that you do. You have to maintain the documentation as how the product evolves and how the stack evolves. And at the same time, you also have to make sure that the documentation is not too overwhelming for others to get started, because that just does not work out for application engineers. They have to spend more time in just understanding things. And then the last and the most obvious one is competing priorities for slow adoption. So we often see teams have the challenge where for them, the priority is to ship new features on the application. And that means they don't have enough bandwidth to adopt the data stack, to take ownership of the data assets. So those are clear headwinds for us. We are trying to figure out how we navigate these things forward. But the key shift that is now we have transitioned to is we have moved from central ownership to a shared responsibility model across the organization. And with an understanding that the data platform team is now acting as enabler and we are not the executor for these initiatives. The long term goal for us is to make data ownership feel as natural as code ownership. It should not feel like this is one more thing that I have to do. It should feel more so like, hey, if we get this done, we are then able to ship new features out more efficiently. And we want to make sure it feels more intuitive, distributed, and then we also want to support that by great tooling. But yeah, those are some of the reflections that I hope folks can relate to, because I've seen these challenges and these tailwinds, headwinds in different organizations. Yeah, that wraps up our presentation. Thank you very much for listening to the spiel.
Thanks, Archit. That was great. I learned a lot. It's great to see that you guys have actually built some type of infrastructure to kind of take configuration files and turn that into a real pipeline. This is, I would say, a pattern that I've seen in a number of tech companies to scale their data operations, which I think is great that you guys have implemented that. I think when you mentioned about like the training, continuing to lowering the barrier, you're also upskilling everyone else about how data works inside. So being a true enabler, really like resonated with me. And then I'll go into this a little bit more, but cross pollination of users. Would love to hear more about that for sure. That's a really like almost like a virtuous cycle that you're creating in terms of adoption.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I think that was something we did not intend. We did not set out the vision to make that happen, but it just happened because engineers bring the best practices from their own teams where they're building software. I can give you one example, which was like DBT unit testing. Engineers were very much accustomed to like doing test driven development where if they're writing a piece of code, they need to be able to unit test it and make sure this works as expected. And DBT has the capability to actually unit test your models. So you can give like a mock data set and you can say, does this model transform the data as I expected to using this mock data, all within just one test file. And we didn't know that, this is something that you could do. And this was something that software engineers brought up as they searched on, hey, how do unit test things on DBT? So those are the kind of things that start coming up as software engineers try to contribute on data engineering stuff.
Amazing. Yeah, I think as engineers, sure, we like building things, but if something's broken, you would want to know right away where things are broken. So having I think all really great software engineers have that mindset of test-driven development, and it is actually quite important for data now because like your especially data pipeline, you're just building on top of other pipelines usually.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So I guess to step back a little bit as you're reflecting your journey at VTS and how observing how data is being used in the company. I guess given that you've also worked with legacy systems and other companies in the past, what are some of the things that made VTS data and their data operation unique or a little different than how you worked with data in the past?
Absolutely. I think there's this common saying in the industry, right? Like the data has four dimensions: the volume, velocity, veracity, and the variety of the data, which guides how complex data you're dealing with. Um, Most of the organizations that I had worked in the past, their challenge was they were saying a lot of data that was flowing it at a high velocity, meaning a lot of volume, lot of velocity. But for VTS, because they are into commercial real estate, you have commercial leases which last like years. So you really have inherently slow moving data than you would in something like IoT company. But the challenge really is in the variety and veracity of the data. So basically, we see a lot of variety in our data because we deal in so many different domains, right? Whether it is like leasing, marketing, tenant experience, bookings, reservations, visitor management. So we have too many, too much variety in our data where we have like 26 plus application sources, 12 plus Postgres databases. So it's a lot to wrap your head around. So that's why decentralized makes more sense because individual teams know their data better than one central team would. And then the other challenge we have also seen is the veracity of the data, as in how can you trust the truthfulness of the data because we get the same data points from few different systems. So entity resolution then becomes a problem for us to figure out whether this property that we are seeing in this data source is the same property that we are seeing from the other data source. So kind of matching that becomes a problem. So that's a unique challenge that I haven't seen in the past in my experience. And then the other thing is monetization of data. Most of the teams that I have worked with, the data engineering platform generally supports internal reporting, right? Where you create dashboards for executives, you create dashboards for application teams to understand how their application is performing and kind of take internal business decisions. Whereas for VTS, we have monetized our data and our insights where we actually roll it up as part of our product and generate value for our customers. When that happens, you look at reporting and data engineering from a much different perspective because the stakes are higher. You will see customer requests at a much higher rate. I would say it's just a different ballgame than just doing this for internal reporting, which makes it complex.
Yeah, the quality and everything, yeah, everything else, the data product quality becomes a lot more important.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome. Um, I know that one of the parts that you mentioned, and this is, I think, one of the parts that a lot of data teams struggle with, is getting the full executive buy-in within the company. You mentioned that that is something that really helped as a tailwind for your initiative. What are some of the things that you saw that really like represented the executive support for everyone else inside the company? And I'm also curious to hear a little bit more about how you were able to build up the early champions across different teams.
Right. So, as I mentioned, right, like I joined VTS just 1 year ago, but this initiative was in works from before that. And one of the key reasons why VTS was taking this direction is they realized where the market is going, how data engineering teams are shifting towards a more hybrid or decentralized model. At VP and director level, they saw the opportunity of if we leverage that model, then we can reduce our time to insight, we can generate more value for our customers, and that is what pushed them to say, okay, we need to buy in on this at an executive level. We need to create OKRs that are focused on driving this mission at an organization level. So it was a realization by the executives that this is the way to go to generate more value for our customers. In other organizations, I've also seen that I've been part of is moving away when you're moving away from legacy platforms and exploring what does the next generation of my data platform look like. That's when I've seen this model being pitched to the executive that hey, if we take this approach, now that we have microservices, it's just going to work very well going forward than just scaling your data platform team endlessly for new things. Uh, but yeah, those are the things for the executive buy-in. And once you have the buy-in, then comes the execution part from them is to like making sure they're setting the expectations with other teams that, hey, you have to do this, it is non negotiable, and codifying that into OKRs going forward.
For sure. So if someone's also thinking about decentralizing their data management, what are the main areas that you would recommend them to measure, both quantitatively and qualitatively?
Yeah. I would say this with a preface that decentralized model is not the right model for every organization of every shape, right? It's not a one size fits all. So I think first would be understanding the differences between the various models that you have, like a centralized team, hybrid team, and the decentralized model, and kind of making sure what the organization goals are, which model works best in the context of the organization. And then once you have that, it's about engaging in conversations with not just executives and the higher ups, but also with your adjacent teams, understanding what challenges they are facing when they talk about their data. And it's a combination of all of these things that then forms a picture of what's the right approach for our organization to address the challenges that are specific to our organization. So I would say it's not a one size fits all kind of a solution to have a decentralized model.
Sure. Are there any metrics that you would use to determine or to understand how the progress is going during the phases?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think once you are locked into, okay, this is the decentralized model that we need to adopt, I would say there are two categories of metrics. One is quantitative metrics that you can easily measure. One of the things that we use is usage patterns and usage activity, primarily on Select Star and then also on Snowflake. But we try to figure out how many users are using the platform, how often are they using it, and who are these users? Are they outside of the data team? Which kind of forms a picture of how many people are actually interacting with your platform. Then we also try to track how many developers are actually contributing to the data stack, which you can easily do by things like, GitHub easily tells you who are the top contributors in the last X number of days or something like that, which can tell you how many folks are actually contributing. So those
Like
are
on the DVT repo
DVT, Looker,
model? Yeah,
ingest, those YAML files, right? So I'm hoping all the development you do is backed by GitHub or any Git version, and then you can track exactly how many, which users are contributing to those Git repos.
makes sense.
Yeah, so those are quantitative metrics. You can also do things like surveys with other teams at regular cadences to build some qualitative understanding of how comfortable teams are feeling with owning their data and what challenges they're facing, which can also tell you a similar story from the adoption perspective.
Yep. And so just to clarify, the production engineers are building, either writing config files or building their own DBT models to productionize it, but also they will add or update LookML files too. That,
Yes.
that's
Yes.
great. Because then they are really becoming the owner of like to surface up to product managers and other business stakeholders directly.
Absolutely. Yeah, because they need to understand how they're going to model the data at Looker, how they want to surface the insight, and that kind of then seeps into how are they going to model the data in DBT and Snowflake. So it has to be end to end. Otherwise, you create the barriers where two people are working on the same thing, but they don't understand what they're working towards.
Right. So
I
in
would say,
terms of, oh, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say it's not that every team is able to contribute, but uh, there are a set of teams who are now contributing to the LookML repo with the set of instruction that they are able to. But obviously, there are challenges, and for complicated use cases, we are still the last line of defense where we kind of work with them to push through those initiatives.
Yeah, for sure. Would you say then, in terms of like onboarding, it's actually, do you think, is it the technical side that was more challenging or like the data modeling side that became more of a challenge as you were shifting to decentralized model?
Data modeling. I think we have to give credit to application engineers. I think they're really good. They can pick up new stack if you give the right resources. But what we see after a few years is all the focus at the start was just building out the frameworks and making the assumption that once you write a SQL, you only need to know how to write a SQL query to create a DBT job and you can surface the insight. And that is so, so wrong because it's not just that you are writing SQL query, you are actually modeling data. So if you don't have some framework of how you think about ERDs, how you think about dimensions and facts, you are just creating things on the fly, which is going to result in a very poor platform in the future.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Making sure that at the end of the day, even though everyone creates their own models, they're all connected to one another. And you do want to have that purview of centralized way to understand how things are actually being created, maintained.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome. Is there any place where you apply AI in your data workflow today?
In terms of applying the workflow, we are looking into using things like Cursor because we have decentralized our DBT repository, Looker repository, and some of the ingestion patterns. So now we are thinking about okay, what if instead of someone starting from scratch, they can work with AI enabled IDE like Cursor to say, hey, I want to build this model. Let's start building it and let's go through that process. And the job for us becomes how do we create guardrails right on the cursor? Because cursor has like LLM rules that you can set, which you can say, hey, the models should look like this. The models should go in this directory. And then you can also build cursor memory, which is like context for LLM to go and look at it over a period of time. So we are looking into how we can use these things to further reduce the technical barrier so that developers can start using natural language to get a head start and kind of augment their workflow. I don't think it can fully replace it, but I think it can augment and provide more support than they would usually have otherwise.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. We've gotten other customers looking into Cursor to leverage metadata from SelectStar, which I thought was a great use case. But to get it to in the hands of software engineers, for someone who's not always looking at just the data models, but they have a purpose of creating a specific data model, I think that's a really great way to um, enable them with Cursor.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think these
Awesome.
are
Mhm.
And, we're also looking to do is like thinking about how we enable conversational analytics, at least for internal users, before we aim for external. So I think that reporting part is also one thing where we are trying to figure out how do we leverage LMs to enable conversational analytics instead of like looking at a dashboard, which is quite challenging. If you don't have 100% accuracy and if you don't have the trust, it's hard to build that out.
For sure. Definitely, this is where like semantic models and making sure that's also being managed correctly becomes a challenge and the important part.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Um, I mean, there's a lot that is currently happening in the data industry, especially with AI and others. Curious to hear a little bit more about what you're most excited about. And
Yeah, I think AI is on top of everyone's mind right now. And how do we use that, use these Gen AI models to generate value for our customers? Specifically for data, we did some evaluation of just throwing LLM on top of our Looker semantic models. And we quickly realized it's not going to work because we need to go back to basics. We need to have really good data modeling. We need to have really good metadata attached to our data, which means if you have a column, the column description should be very clear. If you have a table, the table description should be very clear. And then that same thing should happen at each and every layer till it reaches till the end. So we are sort of now back to the basics where we are trying to where the picture that is emerging is if you don't have good data modeling, if you don't have good metadata efforts put in, just turning on LLM is not going to work out. You need to work on the basics first. I'm excited that we are going back to the 1970s and 1980s that people have largely ignored, myself included, guilty. But we did that because compute cost, storage cost, all of that was not a concern. And that means you can skip some of the data modeling steps to get to the value faster. But looks like that's not the case if you want to enable AI.
yeah, for sure.
I think the open table formats like Iceberg are also picking up steam in the last couple of years, kind of taking away the monopoly from cloud warehouses. So I think it's going to be exciting to see how that shapes up going forward as well. There's been a lot of interest from various organizations. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, I feel like that is another like a move of like going back to the older days of almost like Hadoop, like when it first came out, and now it's the iceberg going into the lake house.
Yeah.
Boom. Awesome. Well, I see one comment here. Like Zoe said, that this has been really helpful, and how you're like really defining that data scalability, especially. I think a lot of the things that you mentioned, like by decentralization and being an enabler of data teams, you can truly scale how data can be leveraged inside the organization. And I think that's a really cool and important part.
Yeah, it's a journey. I think it's a continuous thing that evolves as we go.
Awesome. Well, Archit, thanks so much for joining me today. This was great.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed this.
All right. Awesome. We'll see you later.
Thank you.
Thank you.